The Oregon Ducks and Ohio State Buckeyes sit atop the college football world. There's a lot to be happy about in Eugene and Columbus. There's also a lot of motivation. There's a lot of built-up frustration within the Oregon fan base and team and the Ohio State fan base and team. And there are some demons to exercise this Saturday against their arch rivals. It is time to predict and preview Oregon, Washington, and Ohio State, Michigan.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
There may be a lot of points on the scoreboard scored by the top two teams in college football this weekend because there have been losses, there have been pent-up frustration within these two rivalries. Oregon has lost 3 straight games against Washington. Ohio State has lost 3 straight games against Michigan. The Buckeyes have not beaten the Michigan Wolverine since 2019. It's been 5 calendar years because of the lack of a matchup from the COVID cancellation in 2020. There is no question about the motivation going into this week, for the Ducks and the Buckeyes. Let's start first out west with that team out west in the top-ranked Oregon Ducks facing off against the Washington Huskies, 19.5-point home favorites on Big Ten Saturday night. Man, these Ducks are determined. Now, the losses between Ohio State to Michigan and Oregon to Washington, they've been a little bit different. We've seen the Ohio State-Michigan games be a little bit more lopsided, which certainly factors into their determination. We'll cover that when we talk about Ohio State and Michigan. But when you look at this Oregon program, they have been oh so close. It has been a play here. It has been a call there that has impacted the result of these last 3 Oregon and Washington matchups. Each of the last 3 losses for the Ducks have been by a field goal each. That was then. Kalen DeBoer is certainly gone. Michael Penix Jr. is certainly gone. Roma Dunze, right, is certainly gone. These Washington Huskies look very, very different now with Jed Fish at the helm, and Dan Lanning is still operating the Oregon machine at an extremely high level. This is an Oregon team with a purpose. Part of its purpose is exercising this demon and beating the Huskies from up north in Seattle. But it's not their only purpose. Dan Lanning kind of talked about it in his press conference. It says, he's talked about that, I think, a little bit in the Ducks versus them videos as well. It says, hey, I like that you're caring. I like that you're emotional, but we cannot play with emotion. And Oregon needs to be able to see the task at hand, certainly on Saturday, and be focused on that, but also be focused on the ultimate goal that stands before them. A Big Ten championship, potentially, a run in the college football playoff. This is a step in that journey for the Oregon Ducks right now. Washington, this is kind of their Super Bowl of the season, right? And you got to imagine that the purple and gold of the Huskies are going to come out ready to go, and they're going to come out ready to play at Autzen Stadium. That preparedness, how far is that going to get them? Well, maybe let's break this one down a little bit. One key return for the Oregon Ducks, I think, is really going to help them offensively, and that's the return of Tez Johnson at wide receiver. Now, in the absence of Tez Johnson, we've seen other guys be able to step up. We've seen Justice Lowe certainly step up. Trayshawn Holden has become a bigger and badder part to this offense, certainly. But you can tell the loss of the explosiveness and the playmaking ability of Tez Johnson in the slot has certainly affected this offense. Now, we talk about him getting off the mend. And I think, everybody's going to look at that last game for the Ducks against Wisconsin. But you're looking at the end of an 8-game stretch. Wisconsin was coming off of a bye, and when we talk about Super Bowls, Wisconsin was certainly putting all of their effort and enthusiasm into possibly pulling that upset at Camp Randall Stadium in Madison, Wisconsin. I think that bye week was extremely needed right now for the Oregon Ducks. I think that they are well rested, and certainly they are going to be ready to go and ready to possibly take down the Washington Huskies. Having Tez is going to help them attack a Washington secondary I'll say it's solid, right? I'll say it's certainly one of the best parts of this Washington team, but I'll maybe get into other reasons and other ways that the Oregon Ducks can attack this secondary as well. Like, you look at what Washington has recently done. Like, you look at that Penn State game that was on the road, that was the whiteout for the Nittany Lions. This is Washington is going on the road to Oregon. It's going to be in front of a hot, intense, hyped up crowd, you know it, at Autzen Stadium in Eugene, Oregon. Penn State threw for 220 yards in that matchup against Washington, and they rushed for 226. I think Oregon is a better offense, certainly, than the Penn State Nittany Lions right now. I think Oregon, there's a chance that we could see a very similar output to what the Penn State Nittany Lions were able to do. Now, before I really get in and talk more about Oregon, I want to make sure that I mention this about Washington. Jed Fish said in his press conference this week, there is no really sharp direction or angle that they're going to go at the quarterback position. It's been Will Howard for most of the year. We've seen a lot of DeMond Williams, and we saw DeMond Williams take over in that UCLA game certainly as well. I'm very curious to see where Washington goes at the quarterback position in this game. I think that they're going to start out with Will. I think they're going to use DeMond Williams as a little bit of a change of pace guy, because I'm not sure you want to throw DeMond into this situation. And we'll maybe talk more about this Oregon defense, but this is a defense that it is going to be difficult to move the football against, even if you have better quarterback personnel than the Washington Huskies certainly have right now. I think you want to use DeMond being able to try to using his athleticism while also keeping his threat in the throw game to try to keep this Oregon defense certainly off balance. And then when you take a look at this Washington offense, and I talked about it at the beginning of the year, I've certainly talked about it at times throughout the season, they need to get their skill players involved, right? It's Denzel Boston at wide receiver, it's Giles Jackson, and it's Jonah Coleman running the football. Now, when you look at Jonah Coleman, he's a guy that is going to seek contact. So, like earlier this season where Ashton Jeanty is way up here, and everybody else is kind of on another level right now. But in that game, Ashton Jeanty broke a lot of tackles. And you look at maybe a drive that the Wisconsin Badgers were able to put together against the Oregon Ducks in that matchup where they were able to run the football fairly effectively. Okay, if Jonah Coleman is able to get past that first level, you need to be able to bring him down. You need to be able to avoid broken tackles and limit the amount of momentum that he can carry forward, certainly, in that run game. But here's the deal about all of this. Okay, it's a Big Ten football game, and I think the Ducks have a great potential to dominate the trenches. I talked about the quarterback play for Washington, and they need to find success. Right, the guys on the perimeter need to be able to find success, which I think finding success on the perimeter against their former teammate in Jabbar Muhammad, yeah, and these other great defensive backs, I think that might be difficult in and of itself. But I think Oregon is playing with a tremendous trench advantage in this game against the Washington Huskies. Even though they might play, but even if you don't see Marcus Harper on the offensive line in this game, even if you don't see Jordan Birch on the defensive line in this game, Oregon is a much superior team on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I have been every week. I'm so impressed with what Mateo Uiagalelei has done as a true sophomore. He has become one of the Big Ten's best players able to get into the backfield and be able to wreak havoc so far this season. Been also impressed with Amari Washington. Okay, a lot of people, they focus on Derek Harmon, they focus on Jamari Caldwell, those big bodies up front, but the defensive line rotation has also been key with the young guy in Washington, certainly up there as well. The Huskies give up the fourth most rushing yards in the Big Ten. So I think that Oregon is going to be able to feast in the trenches in this game. I think that they're going to pin their ears back. They're going to get pressure on whoever is at quarterback back there, whether it's DeMond Williams or whether it's Will Rogers. I think the defensive backs are going to play tight coverage. I think it's going to be tough to get big plays down the field for the Huskies. And then when you look at this run game, Oregon has been very good at, like the linebacker play. You know, we talk about the front, we talk about the trenches, but the linebackers, I think, have been so key to Oregon's success defensively this season, with Bryce Betcher coming up and making plays, Devin Jackson, Jeffrey Bassa. You all know the names certainly by now that the Ducks have. I think it's going to be tough for Washington to generate a lot of offense, certainly in this football game. For me, this all comes down to the big advantage that Oregon has in the trenches. I think offensively, this is a team that's going to be able to run the football fairly effectively, and I think that's going to set up some big explosive plays down the field to the Evan Stewarts, the Holdens, and the Tez Johnsons of the world. All right, folks, it is prediction time. There are demons to exercise in this one, and there is a tremendous Jimmy's and Joe's advantage for the Oregon Ducks in this one. I think Oregon dominates. I've got Ducks 41, Huskies 10, and Oregon completes an undefeated season. Let's head to the other big matchup, the Michigan Wolverines and the Ohio State Buckeyes. This one will be on big noon kickoff on Fox. Ohio State is operating with a 21-point Vegas advantage. Will we see a Buckeye beatdown at Ohio Stadium? Now, I mentioned the close games that Oregon and Washington have played over the years. The margin of victory for Michigan over Ohio State, maybe not last year, right? Because Ohio State was driving at the end of the game and a Rod Moore interception kept this rivalry into the hands of the Michigan Wolverines. But the couple of years before that, these losses were a little bit more lopsided. When the confetti went off at the end of the year when Michigan beat Washington to the national championship, that was the ultimate motivation for Ohio State to build and construct this roster, for them to pour 20 or so, whatever $1 million into this roster for Will Howard to come to Ohio State, for Caleb Downs to come to Ohio State. It's the motivation from these Michigan games in the past that have built this Ohio State championship roster. And it's not just the players that they have acquired, it's the players that they kept. It's players, specifically on defense, that could have gone to the NFL, but came back for one more go-around. And they came back for this game to exercise these demons against the Michigan Wolverines. Now, when I look at just rosters, I take the emotion out of it. I look at rosters, and Ohio State, just 85 versus 85, has a much more talented roster, a much more complete roster, really than anybody in college football, but especially the Michigan Wolverines. Now, I know Michigan has been better, on the offensive side of the football, but I mean, this is a team that's right on the fringe of bowl eligibility. They just got it last week, putting up 50 points in Northwestern, by the way. But this is an Ohio State defense that is playing at the top of their game right now. They shut down one of the most explosive offenses in college football in the Indiana Hoosiers. Both Ohio State and Michigan played really good football against Indiana. Both of these teams have really good defensive lines, but man, Michigan offensively, I think it's going to be really tough in this game to generate a lot of production, which puts the ball in the defense's court, so to speak, for the Michigan Wolverines. Their defensive line, Michigan's defensive line, is such a key part to this game. If Michigan wants to try to keep this thing in a box, because that's what they need to do. They need to keep this thing in the box. They need to make this game ugly. And it starts with their defensive line winning the battle up front against the Ohio State offensive line. Look, we all know about the loss of Josh Simmons over there at left tackle, Seth McLaughlin in there at center. We know Carson Hinsman, of course, is at center, who's got some starting experience certainly as well. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, they need to be able to win the battle in the interior. When I look at Ohio State running the football up the middle, I don't think it's going to be ultra easy, of course, when you face off against a defensive tackle tandem like that. More on Ohio State and what they can do offensively a little bit later on in this one, but they need to generate pressure. They need to get Ohio State off schedule. They need to get Ohio State out of their rhythm right now, and this has been one of the top defenses at generating pressure in the Big Ten this season. They had 6 sacks and 8 tackles for loss last week against Northwestern. As a team, 31 sacks for the Wolverines this season. That is third in the Big Ten. I'm looking at Josiah Stewart, 8.5 sacks. That's second in the Big Ten this season. I'm looking at TJ Guy with 5.5 sacks, and we talked about the guys in the middle. They need to be able to generate pressure. If they can play on the other side of the line of scrimmage against Ohio State, maybe they can hang around in this one a little bit. Maybe their defense forces a turnover, right? Maybe their offense gets a little bit of a short field, right? All of these things that they maybe can do. Maybe they get some special teams plays. All of these things that they can do to maybe hang around in this football game as long as they certainly can. Because in the Michigan getting pressure is also ultra important because the Wolverines, plain and simple, just have not been a good team against the pass this season. It's still TBD on the Will Johnson injury right now. Will Johnson has been injured for a majority of this season, specifically in the second half of the season. If they don't have Will Johnson, they are at an extreme disadvantage on the perimeter. So getting pressure on Will Howard, stifling and plugging up this run game is ultra important. It might be the factor in this game for the Michigan Wolverines to be able to hang around. Now, if I'm the Ohio State Buckeyes, and I know this, and I know what the defensive line has up front for Michigan, what do I need to do to be able to attack it? I think I want to do a couple of things. I want to attack with our quick passing game, and I want to get our guys in space, right? I want to do maybe some screen stuff, right? Some great perimeter blocking. I want to get some slants. I want to get the ball into the hands of our talented guys. I want to get the ball into the hands of Emeka Egbuka. I want to get the ball into the hands of Jeremiah Smith. I want to get the ball into the hands of Carnell Tate. And this because this Michigan secondary and really this Michigan defense hasn't been outstanding, in tackling in open space as well. I could see a lot of shorter completions. You break one tackle and it's off to the races 30, 40, 50 yards or so down the field. These weapons for Ohio State are going to be extremely dangerous if they get 3 yards, 5 yards, or more yards of separation against Michigan, and they are able to at least contain this Michigan defensive line and this Michigan pass rush in there as well. So I'm looking for quick passing out to the perimeter. Now let's talk about the run game a little bit. I talked about how Graham and Grant could certainly make life difficult in the interior running the football up the middle. Hey, if Ohio State can run the football up the middle, they're going to have a lot of success in many other different areas in this game. But if I'm Ohio State, if I'm Chip Kelly, knowing that that is the strength of the Michigan defense, I'm doing some zone read stuff with Will Howard. I'm trying to get our running backs on the perimeter. We've seen when Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins kind of get around the corner, they get to that next level, right? They run with a head of steam, and we talked about Michigan not being great at tackling in open space. These running backs can certainly take advantage of that as well. So if I'm Chip Kelly, I just want to live on the perimeter in this game because Michigan wants to keep this thing inside the perimeter. They want to keep this thing inside the hash marks. They want to keep this thing inside the tackles. If I'm Ohio State, I'm getting outside. I'm getting outside as much as I possibly can to attack the Michigan Wolverines. And I think a hot start certainly is important for Ohio State because, and I've said this before about Michigan this season, if they get behind by a couple of scores, even in the late in the first quarter, early in the second quarter, I think it's over, certainly, at that point in time. All right, it is prediction time. There's just too much talent for the Ohio State Buckeyes. I think defensively, we saw last week when Jim Knowles dials up the pressure and he turns that dial up to 11 or 12, we saw how good that they can be up front. I don't think Michigan's offensive line is going to be able to handle that pressure. I think Ohio State is going to be able to create scoring drives right away. I think Michigan's defense is going to be out on the field for a long time. I think eventually they're going to get worn down. The good parts of the defense are going to get worn down over time. I've got the Buckeyes 35 and the Michigan Wolverines 10. So I've got Oregon and Ohio State exercising their demons and advancing to the Big Ten championship game. Those are my thoughts on these games. What are your thoughts? Leave them in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.